So quick question to my IB English A students out there, wherever you might be. What do you know about what's going on in the world today? It's a big question. It's worth asking. And more importantly, if this comes up in your IB exam, meaning knowledge about what's happening right now, the war in Iran, the US and Israel versus Iran. If this were to come up as an article in your paper one exam, what would you be able to tell us about it? Would you be able to include anything insightful and perceptive about this issue? Would you be able to speak about it in a convincing way? Now, I know that in the IB, it doesn't specifically ask you to know about what's going on in the world. And you are not specifically being judged on your knowledge. However, I would contend that those students who have no idea what's going on in the world are, of course, going to be much more vague and less effectual than the students who know what's going on. Those students who have been part of conversations about this, who have been doing reading on this topic, are going to know what's going on in the world. And they're going to be able to speak about it or write about it in a much more interesting, a much more perceptive, and a much more insightful way than those who know nothing. So that's what we're here today. We're bringing in this weekly brief. Hopefully, it's going to be every week to give you a little bit of that knowledge of the world, what's going on, to help you, depending on what comes up in the exam, to know what's going on. So, in the last few days, clearly, this is the biggest story in the world, and I wouldn't be surprised if something like this came up in your paper one exam. Maybe not this exactly, but something about global conflict will be in there somewhere. I've just got a feeling about it. But if not, what's the worst thing that happens? You'll learn what's going on in the world. But in the last few days, the situation has escalated sharply. We know that the US and Israel have struck targets inside of Iran, including senior leadership and military sites within Iran. They may have even taken out some of the regime's highest ranking officials. So it's serious time in Iran at the moment. This came after a period of rising tension tied to Iran's nuclear program, and that's the story. This is where English A students are probably, well, should be interested. The story is it's all about Iran's nuclear program and Iran developing nuclear weapons and America and the rest of the world not being able to control that, which is one way of looking at it. If you're from the Iranian perspective, you probably see things very differently. But of course, as English A students, that's what we're going to be looking at. Deeper roots of this issue. I know a lot of my students don't study history. Maybe you know the history, maybe you don't. But obviously, this goes deeper than just the last few days. There are long historical grievances and distrust between the regime and the rest of the world, including a legacy of foreign interference and the memory of regime change and politics of the area. This is a place that has have a long history of conflict and tension. Clearly, the nuclear tensions are rising at the moment, and there's been a long history of sanctions and issues of sovereignty. The United States frames sanctions as pressure for security and compliance. They want Iran to do the right thing. That's their narrative. But Iran frames them as a collective punishment and economic warfare, all in the name of US hegemony around the world and particularly in the region. So if you look at one side, one perspective, it is the idea of Iran having nuclear weapons is a fear. An unstable government has weapons that we cannot trust. That's a serious danger for the world. And US being the global policeman going in there and doing something about it. But from the Iranian perspective, this is about US power overreaching and looking to hold the little guy down. Very interesting to see how texts are framing it in those ways. Okay, so We are looking at the narratives, and clearly we have two different sides to this. Why is the world overall interested in this? Well, we haven't seen a global conflict like this for a while. Will Iran have the power to resist for too long? How far will America go? Big questions that are being asked. But regional escalation is not isolated. This part of the world is a central hub for many things, and it's going to have an impact. It's a religious hub, and people, believers all over the world, are going to have an interest in this. Also, we look at economic interests from the region. It's a major route for international energy. Oil flows through the main ports there. And if we go into a full on world conflict in this area, it's going to have an economic impact on the whole world. Also, the rest of the world is looking on in terms of international law and looking at the norms, how this is being framed by both sides is seriously important for global international law. The justifications being used, very interesting how this is all being framed, and the arguments set precedents and for others to use. And we know America, Iran, it's not the only battle going on in the world, and other nations might be looking at how this goes and how they might proceed. We know right now the world has become quite fractious. This is what's going on. That's the basics of the story. I'm not the full expert, but that's the broad brush strokes, and that hopefully helps you to know a little bit more how this could show up in the IB exams. It would be obviously in English A, paper one, if they give you an article, or if they give you a cartoon, or if they give you an infographic, or if they give you a government statement or a speech, anything like that could come up. It's so topical right now, and it's these texts are so rich for analysis. I wouldn't be surprised. So with these kind of texts, we're looking at the same thing we do with all texts. We're looking for purpose, audience, tone, diction, structure, all of those things. And in this case, it's very interesting when we're looking at the purpose, what agenda is being pushed in these, and how is that agenda being structured and framed for a global audience or for a particular local audience. That's going to be very interesting. Knowing the tone, the more you know about the whole discussion, the more you have been reading articles about this, it will be easier for you to read that tone and pick up on the nuances. So I'm encouraging you to get out there and read more articles right now about this huge global issue, and take particular interest in the diction. Listen for the framing words. We know there's a few different perspectives, mainly two, but the framing diction being used of unprovoked aggression on Iran, or national, international, global defense from the American side, a pretext for war versus a need for security, a retaliation versus a deterrence. Listen to the language being used from global leaders and see how they are framing this. Are we talking about language of truth, objective journalism, or are we hearing propaganda? And hopefully, you've done a good couple of years in your IB, and you know the techniques of propaganda to apply. That's not for today, but I would be going through and revising those things, listening to what's being said, what's going on. Be very interesting. Those of you maybe not quite going towards that final exam next month, which some of you are, but if you're headed towards the individual oral, this is an instant global issue that you could talk about in many different ways. We've got power and conflict on an international scale. We've got security and fear around the world. We've got how do states justify violence? And that's very interesting how America's justifying things, how Israel's justifying things, and how Iran is justifying their retaliation, how media shapes public consent and stories. That's fascinating what's going on right now. And we could go on and on. And my guys just studied Persepolis. This would be fantastic. I mean, war's not fantastic. Their history has been tragic as well. So it's not fantastic in that sense. but great to talk about these global issues and understand how they are going. If you're a very serious TOK student as well, this is fascinating stuff to be reading about right now and very much brings it to life. What is the truth here? What are the cultural significances going on in these stories? What is the evidence being used to justify things? What are the justifications being used? And we could go on and on to talk about certainty and reliability in global politics. Fascinating things that you could really get involved with. For my guys, if you're listening, hopefully you made it this far, and anyone else, my advice to you is go out there and listen to the news and read some of the articles, get involved in the discussions, and hear what are the claims being made. Which texts are really picking this up? What are the major narratives being proposed at the moment? Who are the main characters speaking out? What are they saying? But most importantly, especially for English A, and as we go towards that exam and the possibility something like this could come up, what's the language of this issue that's going on? All these loaded words, this loaded diction, which has so much connotation, so much nuance in it. Fascinating stuff for you to be analyzing, becoming familiar with, and getting ready to discuss. Looking at the concepts as well of English A, you've got perspective so strongly coming through, two powerful perspectives, along with different cultural ideas being thrown around all over the place, and transformation of international global politics. This is very interesting in terms of the concepts of English A. So that's the weekly brief for this week. I'm strongly encouraging my guys to start getting into the news, know what's going on around the world. Hopefully next week I'll bring you something just as interesting, and something that may come up in the exam that will help you to prepare and be ready no matter what comes up. Either way, I wish you well, and I hope everything goes well for your exams. And here's hoping that the world can find some peace very soon, because it's going to be interesting times ahead. Thank you for listening, and I wish you well.